Is now in session for its regularly scheduled meeting of August 1st, 2024. I'm Joey Hargis. I'm the Metro Zoning Administrator, and I'll be presenting the cases for review in today's public hearing. Board asks if you would please put your cell phone on silent or vibrate so as not to interrupt today's proceedings. We'd appreciate it. The procedure will be to go through the case record as the Codes Administration has it, and we'll do that on the wall and on the video monitors by means of a PowerPoint presentation. I'll present each case that's scheduled for public hearing today and go through all the photographs and site plans submitted before each case. And after my presentation to the board, the applicant will come first to the seats to my right, those four right there. And if you'll push the button in front of the microphone, identify yourself, name and address, and then present your testimony to the board. Once the applicant gets done, if there is no opposition, the applicant will have 5 minutes to present their case. If there is opposition present to a case, each side of a case will have 10 minutes to present. Now that's 10 minutes per party, not per individual. So if you've got a group of folks who wish to speak, be sure to divide up your 10 minutes before coming up. And just where you will be sitting here, there's a clock immediately to your left that will keep track of the time remaining. The clock will stop for questions and answers to those questions, but once you're back into testimony, it will start that back up. Again, we'll go through all cases set for public hearing today. Agendas, if someone needs one, is to my immediate left over on the table there. And the board will deal with old business first and then new business. I do have some preliminary announcements first, though. And just one minor change under BZA new business, case 2024-60 on Porter Road. There is no longer a variance for size requirements under the code. Our staff looked again at the application as submitted, and they comply with the code there. There will still be variances in height and number of stories, but not in the overall size in case 60. We appreciate your patience in relocating this meeting on short notice to the, and thank the Metro Nashville School Board for allowing us to use their conference room today to have that. Before we begin, under old business, I know Councilman Spain wanted to talk when that comes up. Are there any other council members present who I did not see earlier who wish to address the board? Mr. Chairman, seeing none, board does have a consent agenda. Wait, before I do that, let me back up. The board requires that 4 members of this 7-member board be present to constitute a quorum. We have 5 members present today. You will need the affirmative vote of 4 of these 5 members. Failure to do so today will keep your case on our agenda for the next 30 days, however many meetings we have in 30 days, and I think there's only one, which would be the 15th of August. If at the 15th meeting, the members who are absent don't participate or no one changes their vote, your case will be denied, but will be deemed denied by operation of law. If you do have your case today and you do get at least 4 members voting affirmatively for your case will be approved. And then you just follow up with the Codes Department beginning first of next week to talk with them about next steps for permitting. Okay, with that, the board does have a consent agenda. And prior to the meeting, the chairman reviews the cases for consent and feels that testimony would not alter the material evidence in the record, and the case does meet the requirements for what they're asking for. He recommends to the remainder of the board for approval, and I'll enter those cases recommended for consent now. If you're here in opposition to either of the cases that I call out, if you'll raise your hand, please, and we'll put the case back on the agenda in its normal order and hear it in the order listed. The first case recommended for consent agenda is case 2024-101. It's at the bottom of page 2. It's Fulmer Lucas Engineering, GUB Contractors, owner of the property at 640 Old Hickory Boulevard, also known as Riverside Golf Course. Riverside is requesting a special exception to allow the construction of a new golf range facility, food and beverage service in the RS 40 districts. Are there any parties present opposed to case 101? Okay. Seeing none, this case meets all the requirements of a special exception. Then finally, case recommended for consent, case 2004-107. It's at the bottom of page 3, or the last case on page 3, Mr. Roberto Gutierrez and JMS Property Group at 2830 Clifton Avenue, seeking a variance in the street setback in RS 5. Are there any parties opposed to case 107? Okay, Mr. Chairman, seeing none, that is your consent agenda, and we'll need a motion and a second.
Make a motion to adopt the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Sorry. Which case? Hit your mic if you don't mind. Oh, try it now.
Okay, it was case 107.
Okay, case 107. We'll pull case 107 from consent and hear it in a regular order. Upon that motion, case 101 has been adopted by the board. If you're here for case 101, you are free to go. Follow up with the codes department beginning on Monday. And Mr. Chairman, under first item is under old business. The case 2024-72 has been in front of the board a few times now, and it was postponed at the last meeting, requesting a traffic study and NDOT's comments upon. NDOT is unable to join us today, so Mr. Dole asked me to give his condolences. He's just not able to attend today. He's very short-staffed and has several people out and just couldn't be present. For the record, in this case, Mr. Bradford is recused, and that would leave 4 members eligible to participate. But with that information, the council member would like to address the board. The counsel for the appellant would like to address too after the councilman's statement, if you're agreeable to. But I guess I'm looking for directions first on if we're proceeding with this case or if it's going to be postponed again. Or
why don't we hear from, do y'all have any objection to hearing from the council person and the appellant again for a few minutes? And then I know that y'all wanted to hear from NDOT. They're not going to be able to be here. And I mean, it's going to take 4 votes, which is exactly how many people we have. So, but I think we ought to hear from the council person and the appellant. And I know they submitted some information today from the traffic engineer that I don't know, in light of that, whether y'all still want to talk to NDOT or not.
I think there might be a letter from NDOT, but we're not in receipt of that letter. That was case 102 yeah. So if you...
That was a different case, I think.
Yeah, so we don't have written instruction or written recommendation from NDOT for case 73?
I think NDOT's original recommendation was, that the applicant continue to work with them is what I recall. Okay.
I got case 102.
Well, can 5 minutes for the appellant and the council person, does that sound reasonable or whatever time they want to speak?
Yes, I'm open to hear a council member and
okay.
apparent, yeah.
Well, how about we'll just give okay. We can decide if we need to give the appellant additional time. Council people, generally, there's not a time limit, so, okay, anybody opposed to that? Okay, so we'll hear from.
Councilor Spain, if you want to address, come over to this table here if you don't mind.
I'm on.
Sir, sounds like.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I appreciate the opportunity this afternoon on item number 1 on your agenda, and I'm sure also in your hearts by now. I promise not to try to take advantage of the lack of a time limit for council members, but I was not able to be at your last meeting where this item came up, so I appreciate you deferring it at that time to give NDOT time to review and provide feedback to the traffic study that was provided by the applicant.
And councilperson, before you go, can you introduce yourself for the record so it's on the, okay. Thank you, sir.
Now that we do have feedback from NDOT on the traffic study, and it has identified numerous and fairly serious deficiencies in that traffic study, I hope that the board will not consider approving this application until some of these issues are addressed. And if you don't have this letter or their feedback, I'm happy to read what their feedback actually was. Do you have this? You don't? Okay, let me just quickly go through them then. NDOT has completed our review of the submitted traffic memo for the swing zone batting cages. The following includes our comments and recommendations. Number one, the applicant's traffic engineer did not scope the submitted analysis with NDOT prior to submittal. The applicant shall coordinate with NDOT on rescoping the analysis to accurately study the traffic from the proposed development. Number two, the traffic counts for the memo were taken during a time when school was not in session, July 2nd, 2024. Number three, the inclusion of FDOT, that's the Florida Department of Transportation's generalized level of service volume tables, is not a methodology that NDOT accepts. The applicant shall reanalyze the traffic using methodologies that are accepted by NDOT. Number four, the applicant shall submit a survey of Highway 70 to determine the necessary vegetation to be removed to provide adequate site distance. Number five, additional comments may be provided after the scoping and the resubmittal of the analysis. So given those issues, I hope the board will not consider approving this application until those have been addressed. I think it's worth.
Do you have the July 31st letter from the engineer that it looks to me like they have that the applicant has addressed them? Are you saying you want us to think we ought to address those with NDOT here in person?
I'm saying that they should be addressed to NDOT satisfaction before this goes forward.
Okay.
Rather than conditionally, because I think it's worth noting that the board's ability to require a traffic study isn't universal or even all that common. I think it's that these cases for special exceptions by definition are out of the ordinary. And I think the council gave the board that authority to make sure that these applications not only check the boxes to meet the requirements for the special exception, but also that they can be done in a safe and responsible way. And I think the members of the community have expressed concerns with the safety of this project in this location. But in addition to that, and I can tell you firsthand because I live on this road just a little further into town, but this is a heavily traveled thoroughfare in and out of the county. So there is significant traffic out there. So I hope that the board will make sure that these issues are met before this goes forward. And for those reasons, I would hope that the board would, if not reject the application, defer it until these issues are addressed.
Thank you, councilperson. There might be questions for you before you sit down. Any questions from the? Okay, they're not. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Burton, 1801 West End Avenue. I would actually disagree with the point that there are significant deficiencies. The deficiencies that NDOT pointed out were, if you look at the report that they sent you can see that the opposing counsel sent their concerns to NDOT, which NDOT then put into their comments. I think some of the comments that NDOT included were standard, and perhaps Mr. Hendry knew that and wanted to draw that to their attention, but I don't think there's significant deficiencies. And I'll just go over them very briefly. As Mr. Pepper pointed out, we did in fact have our engineers respond to NDOT's comments. The traffic study was conducted at the request of the board, not at the request of NDOT. So Kimberly Horn did a routine traffic study. NDOT scope, the request of NDOT scope was covered in this traffic study because they requested a speed study. So that is what that's what our traffic report covered in terms of NDOT scope. The traffic counts, again, we did the traffic study at the request of this board. It happened to be in July. It happened to be during the summer. As Kimberly Horn pointed out, the main objective was to obtain speed data per NDOT's request, and speed data is actually better gathered in non-peak hours. So I think we overcome that burden. And with respect to limited number on the street, limited number of vehicles on the street, as Kimberly Horn pointed out, new trips generated by our building, our use, are not going to have a more significant impact if there's more traffic. We have the same number, maximum 12 vehicles at a time on our property. And again, this is a 26-acre property, maximum of 12 vehicles. So I really would like y'all not to lose sight of that fact that there are only going to be 12 vehicles. It's a 26-acre property. Finally, or two more, the FDOT, those were capacity thresholds they put in for informational purposes. As they explained, as Kimberly Horn explains in their comments, it's just to illustrate the minimal impact of our development. NDOT's comments for a speed study were addressed in our original memo in the form that NDOT typically has, the traffic engineers typically provide those to NDOT. The vegetation has been confirmed. There's an attachment in our memo that we submitted in response to NDOT's comments. The vegetation is confirmed to be within TDOT's right-of-way, which TDOT maintains. TDOT has already removed some of the vegetation since this initially came up, because they maintain that. The only thing that needs to be removed is the tree canopy needs to be cut so it doesn't hang so low. But Kimberly Horn also provided an exhibit that shows you that the site distance is the 610 feet site distance is met even without that vegetation removal. So the vegetation removal is just belts and suspenders, and it's on TDOT's right away, and TDOT does maintain that. The board absolutely has the jurisdiction to order a traffic study, which you did, and we complied. I think we have more than met all of the legal requirements. I understand that some of the members of the community don't want this, but I would contend that some of the members of the community do want this. And as Mr. Pepper pointed out at our last hearing, there are some legal requirements we have to meet. I think the record is pretty clear that we've met those. And beyond that, I don't think there's a lot of discretion with respect to what people want on either side, quite frankly. If so, I would request, this is our third time here. We have met every request that y'all have given us, and I would request that y'all move forward with a vote and approve this since we meet all the conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. You might want to sit tight in case anybody has questions. Any questions for Ms. Lamb? Oh, no questions. Okay, thank you. Okay, so we have to, I know there were two members that wanted to hear from NDOT. NDOT's not going to be here. I believe they have more than met the requirements for a special exception, especially for the number of vehicles, but there's no sense putting this to a vote where everybody here is going to have to vote. If y'all feel like you want to hear from NDOT, then I think the thing to do is to defer it till we can get NDOT here.
I'm sorry to say it, but I do appreciate a response from the applicant, but I think our official person, our department, to determine if the application meet the NDOT requirement or not is the person from NDOT. So lack of response from NDOT, from additional response from the applicant, I'm not comfortable moving forward or even recommending it. So I would rather have NDOT person here.
I will then make a motion that we defer it to the next meeting if that works for, unless there's some reason that doesn't work for the opposition or the applicant. Mr. Hargis, when is our next meeting? Is there any reason to believe that the NDOT, the reason they can't be here today was sickness? Is there any reason that next meeting wouldn't work? Because
I can't imagine any reason. I obviously don't want to speak for them, but I will emphasize with their staff that it's imperative they be present.
Okay, thank you, sir.
I will.
Okay, so motion that we defer until the next meeting.
I'll second the motion, but I wanted to comment. We did receive a response from NDOT, then the appellant responded, and now we're waiting on that, a new NDOT response. What I would like to see is them agree on a safe way to travel. Hopefully there is a safe way to travel in this area. So I don't know that NDOT coming here next time, if there's no resolution, then I don't know that they need to come here. The applicant and NDOT need to work together, in my opinion.
Okay, well, I mean, I think Ms. Johnson wants to hear from NDOT. What I understand is the opposition's lawyer sent a letter to NDOT. NDOT then had wrote its 5 points. the engineer for the applicant responded. And what I understand is, at least with Ms. Johnson, she wants to make sure that that response is okay with NDOT. Is that so?
Yeah, we want the same thing. I just don't know if one meeting is going to do it. So if we tell them to come, NDOT to come next meeting and it's still not resolved, I don't know if that's helpful. That was my point. Yeah, so we are thinking the same thing, yeah.
Looking at the points that are issued, and I'm not an engineer, but I don't think would take that long. There's the site distance that the applicant has addressed, and said, here's our plan, here's our engineering. So I don't view it as something.
I think one of the requests from the NDOT is a traffic count was conducted off school day. I don't know if it does make any difference or not. And if NDOT feels it does not make any difference, I'm comfortable with it. But if NDOT strongly feel may need a traffic count during the school days, they have to do the traffic count after school start August 6th. So still have time between August 6th and our next meeting, and hoping we still have time for NDOT to review that updated traffic counts record. So, but if it's not accomplished by 15th, we have to have certain NDOT responses prepared, and at least they're on the same page, agree or not agree on the safety point. So I think Ms. Kapanek and I are looking at the same data and the same solution.
Okay. And I think if we set it for the next meeting and for some reason either side feels like that doesn't work out, we can defer at another meeting. So I'll appreciate what y'all's comments. Any more? Because we do have the motion. I believe you seconded it. Okay. So there's a motion and a second to defer one meeting. Any further discussion? Okay. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay. So.
Okay, the case is deferred to August 15th. The location for that will be the Sunny West Auditorium. I've just confirmed that. So at our other old meeting spot in the larger room will be August 15th on that case. Okay, members, pull up the first case on public hearing today is case 2024-60. Brandon McDonald, Urban Dwell Homes, LLC, the owner of the property at 1433 Porter Road, requesting variances in height and number of stories in the R6 Contextual Overlay District. The appellant seeking to construct a new single-family residence referred to the board under section 1736-470. Appellant has alleged jurisdiction under section 1740. 180B. Is the applicant present? Yes. Opposition present? Seeing none, come on up, sir. Let me go through my slide. There is no opposition present, so let me go through the slides first. And the subject property is located on the east margin of Porter Road. This will be I noticed there's a pin here, but the actual structure will be located in this area. Yeah, you'll be able to see.
Mr. Hargis, this is the one in which the building coverage is no longer.
The building size of the structure is no longer an issue.
Just the height.
Just the height and the number of stories, and I'll explain those two things for you. The reason the size went away, my staff did not count both structures of an HPR in their numbers. They took the tax assessor's information. There's been new construction since that assessment's been done. So they did not factor in an additional structure, which upped the amount of square footage allowed to be built. What is still at issue here is the height and the stories, and really in the contextual overlay districts, one's a little bit of a function than another. But what is required in the computations there are the average heights of those same residences that we use for the size component, and they are limited to the 150% of the average, 125% of the average height of those existing buildings that we're going off of. And that average, if that average comes in under 27 feet with the multiplier, they are limited to 27 feet, a story and a half. The council thankfully did help us recently and gave us a half-story definition. We're still wrangling over the definition, but at least we have something in the code now. We had nothing in the code. It was hard to, and the reason I kind of joke about that a little bit, the zoning code originally defined story as from floor to floor. There's no numerical number there, so I don't know how you half that, so it's just floor to the floor above it. And then if there's not a floor above it, you run it from floor to the ceiling. That obviously created issues of half stories and us enforcing it. So we got a definition now that works. They are seeking to build a two-story structure here after our measurement. The new half-story definition comes up with knee walls can't exceed 4 feet on that second level. The second level was floor area can't exceed 3/4 of the floor area of the first floor of the house. Those types of things. Like the dormers can't exceed 50% of the roof line. Those issues there. But I'm going to pull up for you while he's talking. I'll pull up the drawings that they submitted for you. But that's the case records we have it. Just confirming again, no one's here in opposition. Okay, seeing none. And then we'll start the clock for you, sir. If you'll identify yourself and make your presentation.
Yep. Homes 3759 Homeland Drive, Nashville, Tennessee, 31708. So we basically been trying to figure out how to get this done for the last 2 years with the neighbor, and we feel like we finally have kind of reached an equilibrium. And so we brought the overall height down, but because the lot is so steep, our house is literally 18 feet lower than the street. We didn't want to do a story and a half because as you drive up, you just see the roof. So we still wanted to have an appealing looking structure that you could see from the street. And then we wanted rear parking. And if you'll notice on the topography, we placed the house back further on the lot, and we basically stuck it right in the steepest part of the lot so that we could essentially dig that out and bury that garage portion of the home underground. So that the front yard was still usable and the backyard was still going to be level usable. So we still felt like that was the most practical placement of the house that still met all the fire code as far as distance from the street and all that stuff. The biggest thing that this took a while was we were having issues with the existing neighbors, but like I said, we feel like we finally found an equilibrium with them and been able to make our case. Any multiple questions? That's basically about all. I feel like last time I was here, I was about to have a baby, and it was much more, I apologize.
Remind me, your hardship on this is that is this 50-foot slope from where the front of the lot starts
So I think
to the back.
a combination of how steep the lot is from front to back, and then also the shape of the lot. If we were to bring the house forward more on the lot, because it's more of a pie shape, it sticks the house right next to the existing unit. So
Yeah.
that's pushing it back. Yeah. So it's topography of the lot is our hardship.
Thanks.
I did not see any opposition in the file. Did you have any opposition from the neighbors? Did you work through all that, it sounds like?
We had two other questions, and both of those were sanitary and stormwater, and we answered those. No issues.
May I ask about the 1.5 story and 2 story difference? You briefly addressed because of the roof line and how it will look from the street. And if you can expand that, why 1.5 is impossible to design in that particular location?
I think it comes down to, because it's so far down on the road, when you press the top of the hill, you're just looking down at the roof of a house instead of actually seeing. We wanted to build something that was going to historically match the rest of the area. Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Joe. Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. We wanted to build something that would match the rest of the area, but because we're so far down on the hill, if we build a story and a half, there's really no way that I've seen with plans to not make it look like you're just staring down at the roof of the house. So to me, the topography still remains the hardship for the project. And that was why we wanted to do a full 2-story, but I think we ended up at 1 foot over the 27-foot height variance. And if that's an issue, then we can still, I can carve off another foot on the second floor if we absolutely had to for overall. But I think that overall appeal wise for the entire neighborhood, having a 2-story house this far down the hill still will look considerably better and fit the neighborhood much more than a 1.5-story house with all the roof. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Okay, thank you, sir. We'll close the public hearing and discuss.
While we're discussing up here, Mr. Hargis, we might need to have a little audio EQ on the presenter's mic, which is on the cusp of feeding back in an unpleasant manner.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
So to me, the 50-foot drop is definitely a hardship, as is the shape of the lot. And it's one of those cases where, and the way I'm viewing this, actually granting a variance results in something that's more consistent with the neighborhood. I get the applicants. It's going to look odd if you see the top of the roof from the road. So I think there are two very unambiguous, clear hardships identified. So
I agree with that. Mr. Chairman, is that a motion?
I can make one, sure. I'll make a motion that we approve the variance based on the hardship of the topography of the lot and the shape of the lot. Second. Any discussion, Ms. Johnson? I think you were about to say something before we, okay. Okay. So there's a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Okay, that passes 5-0. Thank you, sir.
Okay, the next case is St. George Coptic Orthodox Church. The appellant and owners of the property at 2412 Foster Avenue requesting a special exception to allow the addition of an existing building in the RS5 district. Appellant is seeking to construct a new Sunday school and gymnasium building referred to the board under section 1716-170. The applicant's present. Is the opposition present today? Okay, we do have opposition. For just a reminder for all parties, there are 10 minutes will be provided for both sides. Again, it's 10 minutes for the appellants and 10 minutes for the opposition as total. Be sure to divide up your time accordingly. And let me first go through the slide presentation, and then I'll invite the applicants to the table.
Mr. Harris, before we go, the NDOT wants a traffic study on this, and this is a special exception. Aren't we required, isn't the applicant required at this point to obtain a traffic study? And does that mean we ought to put all this off until we have the traffic study?
You can do that. The code itself says list your ability to, as traffic study as permissive, using the word may. Obviously, if you wish to take NDOT's recommendation to heart and do so and require that prior to hearing the case, certainly you can do that.
Well, my thinking on this, which may be wrong, but before we all invest time kind of going through this file and understanding it, I think where we're going to end up, at least where I'm going to end up, is if NDOT wants a traffic study and we don't have one, we're going to be coming back for a traffic study.
Gotcha.
So,
Yeah,
I would go ahead.
I'm with you. I'm not a traffic engineer, so I'm gonna want to hear NDOT's take on that.
So,
Our next meeting dates are August 15th and September 19th.
So maybe September 19th to give the applicant time to obtain a traffic study. Does that sound reasonable?
Is it a traffic study? I think it says parking study.
I thought the NDOT requested traffic study. Maybe I had it wrong, but I thought it was I'm sorry, it is a parking study. Okay, parking study, yeah. Okay, well, I will make a motion that we defer this until September 19th. There's a motion, a second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, so that's deferred until September 19th.
Okay, this case.
If you have a question, ma'am, you can address it to Mr.
I'll be happy to address it, and I'll make
He'll be happy to talk to you about it.
Yes, now, as soon as I get done speaking here. This case will be deferred to September 19th. It will be heard at the Sunny West Conference Room. This is the notice for that hearing. So those parties present in opposition and support, this is the notice. No new notices will go out. We won't require the applicant to hold a new neighborhood meeting or notice provision, but it'll be at our other. Yes.
If I'm unable to attend September 19th, may I read a letter into the record today?
You can email it, but your entrance of an email is part of the record. So the board members do receive it. You're welcome to turn it in to me if you'd like to. And but the public hearing's not open, but you can give it to me. If you have it with you, I'll take it.
It's just on my phone.
Okay, email it to me. I'll give you my email address. Or I'll give you the board's email. So September 19th will be at that meeting. What's the question?
So we'll include more parking that would not be actually evaluated. So I was wondering that should
Amend your site plan to reflect the additional parking that you're describing. That's just be sure in the parking study that I want you to provide, show them where that's coming from for the additional parking. Okay. With that, we'll move ahead to the next case on our agenda. This will be case 2024-102. Yes, before you leave, let me finish this and I'll come to you. 2024-102 Mainland 8th LLC is the appellant and owner of the property at 2211 8th Avenue South and 2207 8th Avenue South, requesting special exceptions from the height requirements in Sky Plane in the CS Zone District. Referred to the board under section 17-12035. Is there opposition to President? Okay. Remember, as I talked about before, 10 minutes total for both applicant and opposition. And be sure multiple speakers, you guys work out who's talking for how long. Just when you're sitting there, just to your left, you'll notice there's a clock. Keep track of that time. Let me go through the photographs and turn it over to the appellants, and I'll speak to the young lady there. Or Christy, yeah, Christy will be able to help you there. Give me 1 second to pull up. And hopefully I've messed with the microphones enough to fix the gain or whatever it is we got going on. So it should sound better to you.
Much better.
Or I may have broke it. I'm not sure, but hopefully I don't get mad. All right, the subject property. This is my aerial photo. I'm going to do this new school method. I'm actually going to use Parcel Viewer and pull it up. For some reason, this version of PowerPoint is not my final version that I finished this morning. So members, the subject property is the parcel in red and the parcel just immediately north. It's those two parcels. Those parcels will be combined as part of this application. Aerial photographs of the property. We zoom in there. Give you some idea. It's this red parcel and the parcel immediately north. Bless you. And we'll give you a Google Street View as well. Again, this vacant lot here with the fence is the subject parcel in question. These are views looking south on 8th Avenue toward Berry Hill. Parcels directly across the street. A view of them. If you're familiar with Obram Juicer on 8th. Again, view looking north, and then the immediately adjacent parcel to that. The issue before this board is a sky plane. Sky plane is also a function of height, and it has to deal In the CS zone district, these are special exceptions under the code in the UZO, and they may petition this board as a special exception that the air, light, wind velocity patterns are not detrimental to adjoining properties and that it promotes a pedestrian-friendly streetscape and environment. This is a view of the site plan footprint showing the building's location along 8th Avenue. See if I can get it a little clearer. Facade of the first levels of the structure presented by the appellants. This massing document was submitted by the applicant showing the proposed massing of the building here. The upper left-hand portion of the photograph is a view with 8th Avenue in the front. This is a view from the alley looking into the subject site. It's interesting to note, you'll see in a couple of exhibits, the parcel in the rear tapers. So it's a little deeper at one corner than it is the other. I thought it was, and then this is what's allowed under the current zoning code. Again, allowed under current zoning. And if you'll notice in these two different sections as I flip between them, notice the sky plane changes a little bit, and that's at those two different corners along the rear. So in this view, 8th Avenue is on the right-hand side. This is the portion of the building that violates the sky plane in the zoning code from both angles. This is a view into the subject property upon my visit there on the 15th of July. Again, vacant lot, currently fenced, views north and south along 8th Avenue. And then aerial view. I'll leave this photograph up and turn it over to the appellant. You'll have 10 minutes, gentlemen, if you'll identify yourselves and make your presentation to the board. Again, you may want to save some of your 10 minutes for rebuttal to the board.
Thank you, Mr. Hargis. Good afternoon. My name is John Michael. I'm an attorney with the Thompson Burton Law Firm. I represent Mainland Companies on behalf of this appeal to the Board of Zoning Appeals. I'm joined by my friend and colleague, David Powell from Hastings Architecture. And with the brief presentation that we'll make today, we intend to demonstrate our compliance with the applicable criteria for this special exception request, but also make ourselves available to answer any questions, whether they be legal in terms of the construct of the ordinance that governs or technical in nature, wherein Mr. Powell will be especially well suited to handle those. We want to say thank you to Councilmember Terry Vo from District 17, right here in 17. As she has been very helpful and cooperative with helping us make sure we arrange our neighborhood meeting and attending that meeting as well to inform herself more so, giving us advice and direction on how best to engage on the subject. So we appreciate her help with that very much. As to the substance of the request, it's a very narrow request in that it's just about a request to shift some of the building's massing from one point to the next. Now, the massing is by right. This is I've used in my brief to this board a simple analogy of Legos. You have the same 100 Legos either stacked up within the red triangle shown on the image before you here on the boards, or with permission from the board, we can move that massing out of that area where it will not be in the mushy pyramid shape, but instead bring that massing forward to 8th Avenue South, on the primary corridor for the area, north-south cut from downtown all the way out until it becomes Franklin Road going southbound. That is the corridor where more residential development is expected, but separate and apart from that, this creates a better building. It helps us manage shadow study and light study that Mr. Powell's firm at Hastings prepared, and you have that in your packet. And although pretty is not in the purview of the Board of Zoning Appeals, this will be aesthetically a more attractive building. And I'll point your attention to the Planning Department's formal recommendation on this case, wherein they acknowledge exactly that as they discuss things like, quoting from the third paragraph of the Planning Department analysis, where zoning entitlements exist that allow for a certain building massing, such as the case here, our focus is on achieving the most appropriate design within the allowances that exist. So we're not asking for any differences on square footage, on density, on the parking count, on the land uses, or the access points to the building. Just a shift in the massing to meet that goal as described by Planning Department. Continuing with the quote, the next sentence reads, shifting the building height toward 8th Avenue South and away from the middle of the site is more appropriate for an urban context and creates a better building design within the same square footage as is achievable by right. So here's the criteria that what we have from planning addresses the criteria very neatly. As Mr. Hargis pointed out for you, that's zoning code at 17.12.060 F3 that enumerates in a roundabout way enumerates three specific criteria. One, the applicant has to prove with evidence that the proposed building height shall not create an adverse impact on air, light, shadow, or wind velocity patterns due to the configuration of the building. Two, we have to address the juxtaposition to and with existing structures in the vicinity. And three, we got to demonstrate that the building height contributes to and does not detract from a strong pedestrian-friendly streetscape. As to number one, air, light, shadow, and wind velocity patterns. That's where your shadow study comes in handy and demonstrates that not only do we not violate, this change in massing can improve those studies and the effect it has on neighboring properties to our immediate west, which are developed residential neighborhoods. On the second, with regard to relationship to existing buildings and even those approved but not yet built, planning's recommendation, the board indicates compliance with that item, specifically with regard to the massing being moved forward, that will work well in this juxtaposition as it's described under the zoning code. Finally, the third criteria that talks about the proposed height contributing to a strong pedestrian-friendly environment, that's one of the most fantastic operative features of this project. By bringing the massing forward, we're activating the streetscape even more so, inviting more pedestrian traffic and usage, especially with retail and commercial options filling out the ground floor of this project. That's exclusively the plan and design. And with the Publix that's now been built on 8th Avenue, just a couple of lots down, and with more development coming that way, this creates great walkable opportunities for everybody in this neighborhood, especially on the west side of 8th Avenue South. We believe that we've demonstrated that the shadow study works. Planning confirms our demonstration that the relationship to existing buildings and those future buildings also works. And finally, that the planned land uses of the street, in particular, help bring us into a more pedestrian-friendly environment, especially with the massing activating the streetscape more. Like I said before, the technical questions with regard to the design will be best handled by my colleague, Mr. Powell. But even before that, we wanted to give a neighbor of ours an opportunity to address the board, Mr. David Mangum, who's a property owner in the immediate area. So let me step aside for him.
Mr. Michael, before you step aside, are y'all okay with the conditions imposed by planning, the 5 conditions?
We are. A number of them were already a specific part of our plan, and the others we gladly agree to.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is David. Good afternoon. My name is David Mangum. I'm a member of this neighborhood. I've lived in this area my whole life. As a child, my parents' house was in this neighborhood, and as a child, went to the Melrose movie theater, and then in college, my bowling PE class was at the bowling lanes. After I finished school, I started a business. We bought a piece of property at 2303 8th Avenue South, which is a half block south of this property. And I've been there for 25 years, and there has been tremendous change during that period. There are 3 reasons why I wanted to come and speak in favor of this project today. First, I believe that the building that is being proposed by Mainland Companies is a more practical building. I believe it's a much more attractive building. We have seen situations before where these sky planes can create unusual shaped buildings, and I think the drawings that I've seen have been very attractive and more conducive to something than what the code provides. It's my opinion that a tall, thin building would provide more sunlight to the residents and the property owners around the property, especially in this situation to the property owners directly north of this site. Furthermore, as a property owner that is surrounded by multiple multifamily 5-story buildings, it's not just the light, it is also the viewscape. And this building will create a situation where there will be a better viewscape for the surrounding properties. When I reviewed this plan, I looked at Mainland Companies. I spent a good bit of time on a couple of weekends, and I drove around and I looked at the various projects that they have done in this town. They are a local company, and I would be pleased to have any of the projects that they have done in other parts of town on 8th Avenue in my neighborhood. Furthermore, they've hired Hastings Architecture, which has a tremendous reputation just around us here, the soccer stadium, the Vanderbilt dorms that have been built around the campus. One of my favorites, the Thompson Hotel. They are quality architects, and it is my opinion that we will not have a multi-story EFS building that has 5 different earth tones painted onto the outside of the building, and I am more interested in quality at this point. One of the main reasons, the third reason and main reason why I want this project to occur is because the people who own this building are going to live there. This will be their home. They will reside in the structure for years. They will be invested in the Melrose community, and they will care about the community. And I want to have people who live on the corridor and off the corridor to be people who care about the community, and I believe this will be accomplished by this development. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, the closing notes would be that we're aware that there are opponents who don't like the proposed massing as we've designed it on both sides of 8th Avenue, some across the way and some on our side as well. But we've been delighted through Mainland Companies and their representatives to talk with a number of neighbors who have been excited about the plan or supportive of the massing and hope for our approval today. They join Mr. Mangum in many of the same talking points of liking the planned land use, which we know is not here today, but also preferring the superior architectural style brought forth by this massing. However, we understand that neither public support nor public opposition carries the day on a special exception case. It is solely a matter of whether or not we've met the criteria enumerated here. And we believe that 1, 2, 3, yes, the study confirms that the light and air components are not adversely affected. 2, planning demonstrates that there is no issue raised regarding the juxtaposition relationship to other buildings. And 3, the design by Hastings maximizes a strong pedestrian-friendly environment. If the board agrees that we have met those, and of course it's no longer a discretionary question, but pursuant to state law, the board has to approve the special exception at that point. Certainly, we're eager to answer any questions that you may have, but we simply ask for your approval of our special exception case.
Before you sit down, I definitely have a question. So Mr. Mangum said the viewscapes would be better. Here's my question, because in reading some of the opposition letters, it seems like maybe the viewscapes are better for some, but that one of the trade-offs is that the viewscapes are, with that tall of a building, are not good for others. So is it the case here that, I mean, I don't, it's hard to visualize this tall a building not making somebody's viewscape not as optimal, and who are those people and how many? I mean, well, you're going to get your chance. I promise you'll have your 10 minutes. We'll ask y'all too. But what could, and I get that there is this pedestrian friendly aspect, which is really important. And I think it impresses me as contributing to the neighborhood. But what about, and I know you did the shadow study, and it sounds like some folks are going to come up here and talk about the viewscapes, but what is y'all's take on that? If we have concerns about the fact that, just looking at this as a non-architect, if you're putting up 4 more stories than normal, what's the give and take here that is going on?
At risk of short-circuiting the question, Mr. Chairman, viewshed is not part of the law on this. It is an opinion of Mr. Mangum that it will be improved. It will be the opinion of others that will not be improved. But it's not part of the criteria either way. Air, light, shadow, wind velocity patterns.
You're educating me. I thought a view is something we could always, the surrounding view is something we could take into.
We're not going to not answer your question. I just wanted to point out that when you go to these core criteria from F3.
I want to know that, because I had it wrong. You're saying that is not part of the.
It's not enumerated in F3. Yeah, air, light, shadow, wind velocity patterns. I can't speak to the wind velocity patterns quite as well, but viewshed's not part of it. Now, strictly.
Did it kind of go to light, though? I mean, maybe.
Which is the purpose of the solar studies that you have in your possession.
I saw that, yeah. Okay.
So viewshed, to me, if I live, for example, across 8th Avenue, and maybe I have a home there, and I look across, if I can see the building and I don't like it, then I can have the frank opinion that it's a poor viewshed for me. I don't like the view. Now, air, light, shadow, those issues that are specifically enumerated, those are more problematic if somebody does a bad job with construction on that. But in this case, Of course, every house, every building, every tree creates shade, but as you've seen in the studies here, it's appropriate to the design. And given that this is just a moving of the massing and not a question of whether the building gets built at all, we believe that we more than met the criteria as codified.
Okay, I appreciate you answering that. Thank you,
Yes,
sir. Yeah. You may have some other questions up here too, so before you. Maybe not. Okay. Well, thank you very much. We'll hear from the opposition and do remember you have 10 minutes to allot amongst yourselves, so.
Good. Mr. Chairman, for the record, the applicant's got 1 minute 46 on rebuttal.
Okay, y'all have a minute 46 on rebuttal.
Okay, we'll hear from those parties opposed to the case. Feel free to come forward. Got 4 seats over here. And again, you'll have 10 minutes in total. Let me reset the clock. I broke that clock over there.
There's 5 seats.
Good afternoon.
You're welcome to come sit by me if you'd like.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, board members. My name is Eric Steele. I am a property owner at 2203 Grantland Avenue. My family has owned a house in the Woodland and Waverly neighborhood since 1989. I am very much concerned about the character of development on 8th Avenue. I'm not opposed to development. We know it's coming. This has been an empty site for quite a while. We do have a bit about the specifics of the exemption request. The developers here are experienced, accomplished developers. They knew full well that the properties, the 2 lots that have been purchased, came with explicit height restrictions. The restrictions, to the best that I've been able to determine, have been in place since the mid-1970s. There are no surprises here. The zoning at the end of the block where Berry Hill begins, development is limited for all structures at 75 feet, 5 stories. As you go north, I know that the city planning has just released a draft of an Edge Hill neighborhood development plan that lists 8th Avenue as up to 12 stories would be, considered the appropriate scale. As part of that plan, they identified a zone directly north of Wedgwood Avenue that would be ideal for a multifamily or mixed-use development up to 8 stories. So we're talking about a 2-block stretch between Bradford and Wedgwood that by right does appear to allow up to 12 stories. Their argument is essentially that the massing calculations and the height restrictions can be separated, the quote-unquote Lego theory. I've reread the zoning multiple times. I see nothing in there that permits them to take those Legos and stack them the way they choose. There's height restrictions that have been explicit since the mid-70s. And to take this to its logical conclusion, if it's a better looking building to be more slender, closer to 8th Avenue, why not stack it up to 32 stories? Why stop at 16? Why not 64? Smaller floor plates, why not go up to 100? I disagree strongly that there is no adverse conditions created and recognize that breaking the height plane is an adverse condition in and of itself. If there was a solar study done as part of their application, I certainly haven't seen it. I do see that the burden of proof, if you look at the specifics of what is involved with getting a waiver, a special exemption in the CS district. Now, when we had our neighborhood meeting, I explicitly asked the question, if the height plane is broken, what protections do we have? And the attorney and architect maintained that protection is not the right word, but clearly on the CS use, it says, because of the diverse nature of uses found in these districts, bulk and buffering standards are designed to protect neighboring areas. To the east, to the west, these are dense single-family houses, multifamily apartments. There are no structures within a mile that are over 5 or 6 stories. This development is on the top of the hill, the highest point in the neighborhood. To argue that there's no difference of an additional 40 feet defies logic. I think there's a reason they didn't submit the solar study as part of the neighborhood meeting, because I've done my own, I don't have money to hire experts, but I've played around online. I've showed the difference between 120 and 160 stories, and the massing shifted, feet, shifted to 8th Avenue. There's no scenario where this does not create an adverse condition for light. The neighbors directly to the north, one calculation I showed that they virtually get 0 morning light in the fall and winter months with this massing move to 8th Avenue. They're basically in the shadow until 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon.
That's the neighbor to the north.
That's the immediate to the north. This also casts a shadow across 8th Avenue. I have a very direct view. Essentially, my children's bedroom will be filled with a very out of context 16 stories. It will dominate my yard. That's noise concerns, that's privacy concerns. In terms of pedestrian effects, having 16 stories directly vertical with minimal setback, with no windbreaks surrounding this tower, in a storm like we had earlier in the week, that gives me serious concerns. My daughter's going to be taking the WeGo bus to and from school this coming year and all through high school. And she's going to be getting off and walking in front of this building. Balconies have furniture, potted plants, scooters, any number of things. This is not going to be safe in a heavy windstorm. So to say there's no adverse conditions, I read through their application multiple times. There are a lot of opinions. They're not supported by hardly any facts.
Mr. Steele, did you, on your light information you submitted, did you take into account the impact of what they could build by right?
Yes, I've got side-by-sides, the 12-story version or 120 feet and the 160 feet version, and also adjusting for moving it closer to 8th Avenue. So I'm not arguing that there may be some benefits to others behind the development. They may still feel that 16 stories is not appropriate versus 12, but at this neighborhood meeting, I am still trying to find, why are we here? Why do they need this? What is the hardship? Again, they bought this property knowing there's existing height restrictions. I'm not hearing a hardship. I'm hearing appeals to aesthetic
This
argument.
is not a hardship case, Mr. Steele. This is a special exception.
Okay.
So we have to grant it unless the opposition can prove that there's a negative impact on the air, light, shadow, or wind
Well,
velocity.
I argue that there is on all those counts. And I also recognize that seeking a special exemption, the burden of proof is on them. It's not supported by facts. You do not have facts before you to support the claim that there are no adverse impacts. The burden of proof is not on us as residents. My concern is that by allowing this, you are opening up every other developable lot to this seeking of this specific exemption. Now, in terms of the other parts of seeking special exemption, we're allowed to take into account the character of the neighborhood, design and architectural compatibility. Traffic impacts certainly are a concern, and the integrity of adjacent areas. I don't see how they've met the burden of proof in any way. At the meeting, I said, why are we here? What are you seeking to redress? And one of the answers I got was the fact that the quote unquote by right version of this, there's very little place to put a swimming pool that is, according to their marketing rendering, a key part of their amenities and benefits the neighborhood not at all. So in exchange for supposedly improved view sheds to the building to the north and behind, they're looking down at a loud pool deck. There's potentially other versions of this tower that could be built. I think it's a false choice between 12 stories in the middle, and 16 stories in the front. I think why we're really here today is to open up a pool in the back without sacrificing one bit of buildable square feet. There are compromises to be made here that are not before the board. In terms of what the application references twice is the community character manual. They cherry-picked one sentence about creating, beneficial pedestrian uses, but they've completely ignored every other part of this. There is a lengthy section on building height. I don't need to take up the board's time with reading each and every one of these, but contribution that the building makes to the overall fabric of the center in terms of creating pedestrian-friendly streetscapes, I argue that it's a detriment. It will be in shadow more hours of the day, both sides of 8th Avenue, more looming structure over the sidewalk. There's nothing in here to say how I'm benefiting. They're going to have to install sidewalks as part of this development, whichever version gets built. I don't see anything here. There will be shadows cast onto the other side of 8th Avenue where currently there are no sidewalks. It's a very treacherous stretch of road. I know that that's part of the city's longer term planning. Right now, it's not existing. So, in terms of dusk hours, it creates a hazardous condition on the other side of 8th Avenue. There are on and on about context transitioning to the urban mixed-use corridor. There's no transition here. Again, you have to walk miles to find another structure this high. We can see the residential development at Belmont University from every house in the neighborhood, and that, I believe, is only 12 stories. There is no part of the neighborhood
Mr.
that will
Chairman,
not
can I
have
just
this.
pause for just a minute? Sir, there's 121 left for your entire group.
I urge the board to
Okay, I mean, you're
request the
welcome.
traffic study and slow down this decision if there's not enough evidence before you, because I don't see any of this supported by the facts.
Thank you. Mr. Seal, you have a question before you go to somebody.
Well,
This
it's
is not
actually
counted
for-
against your minute.
It's actually for the zoning administrator.
Okay, sorry. And this doesn't come off of your time, so.
I just want to get some clarity on what we're looking at today. The 75 feet high requirement mentioned, that's in Berry Hill zoning code, which I don't believe
No,
applies to this
it has no
property.
jurisdiction to us.
We don't, okay, that's not,
Correct.
we cannot look at the Berry Hill.
It's the end of the block.
The other question was just, so it's CS zoning, and we saw in the exhibits earlier that the height is controlled by a height control plane, not necessarily stories or a specific height. That's correct?
That is correct. Remember, it's our zoning code works more on the sky plane, which is what we have. So at your setbacks here in our jurisdiction, you can be 30 feet tall at those setbacks, and then for every foot you come back away from that setback, you get to go up an additional 1.5 feet. So there's not if I had a 20-acre property, I could go 100 stories. So there's not a maximum cap in our zoning code. Now, there are some zone districts, if you notice the table, there are a few that are limited in height, but that is not one of them.
And also, this is in the UZO.
It is correct.
Okay, that wasn't mentioned in the script, in the docket, so I just wanted to get that clarified. And the UZO is what's allowing this special exception to come before us, correct?
Correct. It comes from Chapter 1712-060, and it's under letter F, special height regulations for all uses, and uses excludes 1 and 2 family within the UZO. In all districts, the principal or accessory structure may exceed the maximum height at the setback line based upon a review of a special exception by the Board of Zoning Appeals. An applicant shall provide evidence to the board that the proposed height shall not create an adverse impact on light, air, shadow, or wind velocity patterns due to the configuration of the building relative to the maximum permitted height standards and its juxtaposition with existing structures in the vicinity or approved but not listed. I know that the gentleman spoke before about what he was citing you was the special exception requirements, and that's in 17 17, 16, 150, those don't apply here in this case. Now, that's not to say you can't reference some of those as far as placing conditions, but it's not from the checklist in which you're judging a proposal under this. That 17, 16, 150 general provisions covers special exception uses, not special exception sky plane variances. So like the batting facility and the other special exception that you heard today, those would fall under 150.
That's a good clarification. I didn't realize that last point. Thank you.
What's that?
Yeah.
Okay, whoever is next is, you still have about a minute and a half, I believe, or a little bit longer than that.
Yes, thank you. My name is Carl Brown. I live in the lofts on 8th, which was in that picture, the brick structure that's right next door to where this is going to be built. I do want to say, since Mr. Mangum brought it up, I also grew up in Nashville. I went to Brookmead Elementary School. I went to Hillwood High School. My dad was a Methodist minister at the Board of Education, at the Methodist Publishing House. He played the pipe organ at West End Methodist Church, and my mother was a divinity school librarian at Vanderbilt. I've been in this town for the majority of my life, and I've seen this town be developed in a way that's been detrimental to many neighborhoods, including, most importantly, Music Row, where many of our historic structures have been demolished for tall skinnies and for further development only for the return on investment of absent shareholders. And what I'm saying here in this meeting, even though I'm a lawyer, I don't have a legal argument. I have a neighbor argument. If they bought this land, they should conform to the requirements of the land because of number 2, and I don't have the exact language, but it's the juxtaposition and whatever the other, they glossed over number 2, that they have to comply with or convince you that this special exception will not affect the adjacent buildings and what's juxtapositioned with this new structure. It's going to cause a complete different height from everything else. We've lived through the construction of Publix. We've lived through the construction of the Foxtrot right next door. We've lived through the construction of the Airbnbs behind us across the alley. And every one of them have complied with the height requirement and with the general neighborhood structure requirements and aesthetic makeup. There is no reason for there to be a special exception for this building to just bust out the top of 8th Avenue above everything else and cause complete and total change to the character of the area. That's going to invite more and more, just like we've seen across the whole
Mr. Chairman, the gentleman's time's expired. Would you like to extend more time for the opposition? It's okay. I just want to see if the board wishes to grant more time to you guys.
And we'll certainly grant the same amount of time to the applicant in the rebuttal.
Certainly.
So before we do that, why don't we settle on an additional 5 minutes? Is that okay? So there's an additional 5 minutes that's also granted to the applicant. So you got 5 minutes. So you've got, I think, 3 other people that need to speak. So
There's no light.
Yeah.
I can't see anything then.
My name is Ruth Calhoun. I live at 2201 8th Avenue South, which is directly north of the building.
We're all neighbors.
Yeah,
We're
so-
in the same building.
Same building.
Yeah, so I live on the 2nd floor. I live on an end unit. The building that went up to the left of us, to the north of us,
Foxtrot.
that I have no lighting in the day. All my natural lighting is gone, and it's only 4 stories. So I cannot imagine that this building is not going to be a detriment to the other people on the other end. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
My name is David Friedman. I live at 2201 8th Avenue South in Lofts on 8th. I am on the other corner, the south end. Now, when they talk about it's not going to do any detriment to light, I've got 2 windows there. When that building goes up, I'm not going to be able to see anything but their building. And I'm concerned about the traffic situation. on 8th Avenue South. I don't know if there has been something done as far as checking to see what this is going to incorporate, because how many apartments are they putting on this, or condos are they putting in this building? Where's the parking space for all these cars going to be?
And if I could just add to that point, there is an alley that runs behind these
One lane.
buildings. It's one alley, and it runs parallel to 8th. And if you look at 8th, 8th is right here, the alley is here, and all these buildings are in between the alley and 8th. The alley is the only means of ingress for us and egress from our parking. It's the only means of ingress and egress for all the deliveries to Publix.
And
All the
the
big
trucks
trucks for Publix.
come
The-
down that
The
way.
garbage disposal people all have to use that alley. It's also now been turned into a thoroughfare because people have discovered it and are now using it as a through street. We add 12 stories, I understand, is acceptable under the current code. And if they do that, it's going to be bad. But if you add another 4 stories and the inhabitants that's going to incorporate, you're going to have traffic problems that I've heard references to traffic studies and parking studies. I think that's an important component of this one too.
But
But
sir, they're not building any additional units.
no, I understand the mass. And my main argument was the difference to the rest of the neighborhood was my main.
The light and the
I
shadow.
would add, though, that the parking count has not been finalized, and they've admitted that based on the fact that what's before the board today hasn't been determined. So the mix of different units, smaller floor plates potentially could mean smaller units and could potentially equal more parking counts. And the alley that they're referring to, in terms of creating pedestrian headaches, the side street on Bradford, where this alley joins, is already very treacherous. I walk my son to school at Waverly Belmont, down that exact path.
Douglas will.
Douglas as well. Douglas as well. They are very treacherous, and adding 200 cars from that alleyway, there's no crosswalk there. Bradford is a very narrow street itself. I don't know how it's going to work, honestly.
And I'd just like to add also, there are 9 different apartment buildings that use that driveway, that alley, for access to and from their parking areas. So that's the apartments on Douglas and our apartments that face A South.
I think the bottom line is they should make it work on the property that they purchased under the conditions that were attached to the property they purchased when they purchased it. Why grant a special exception to completely disrupt the character of this neighborhood?
I'll just speak briefly. I'm Benita Williams, and I'm a longtime property owner on Grantland.
Can you give us your address, please, ma'am, for the record?
2101 Grantland. I've owned the property since the 1980s. I know this is a very narrow question now about 16 stories versus 12, and frankly, many of us were shocked to know that 12 stories was even allowed, because we're talking about 2 blocks essentially between the Berry Hill zoning, which is limited to 5 stories, and Wedgwood, which seems kind of like the north border of the neighborhood. So frankly, it was shocking to most of us that live there, because we chose that area for the historic zones, the last of the streetcar neighborhood on 8th Avenue. There's still some of the original buildings, which I always hoped that would get continued. So just speaking narrowly about this proposal, I want to say, I'd spent some time reading the community character manual that was adopted in 2017, and it just seems like this violates all of that. I mean, it recommends building, and this is for the T4 CM corridor. It says building heights are recommended 3 to 5 stories, which would be consistent with Berry Hill. They should be consistent with the surrounding neighborhood. The setback should be used to mitigate building heights, and it recommends transitions to surrounding buildings to step down in height. So it seems, I know this is narrowly looking at the extra 4, but I'm like appalled at that this building, even as it is, I mean, what they're asking for, it will be 11 stories taller than any building within anywhere up and down that corridor. So to me, I just urge you all as a first step to deny this petition.
The height
Thank you.
control plane is there for a reason. I think that's our basic argument. It's there for a reason. If you purchase the property and you research it, you know it's there.
I think y'all may still have some time left.
Maybe y'all should consider going down and taking a look at the area, see what it's like right now.
It's hard
okay?
to describe. Yeah.
It's hard to describe, but I live at 8th Avenue right there, and I can show you where they're building and what it's going to cut off. I think y'all should go and look at it before you make a decision.
I drive down that street pretty frequently. I know right where it is. I'm sure other board members do too. And we've had some really good visuals. So, but we appreciate that.
And it's right
We're not just familiar with the property. That's what I'm trying to.
Yeah, it's right next to the Smiling Elephant Restaurant. I'm surprised they survived the building of the Publix.
Really?
Okay.
One second.
Hi, I'm Tanya Lewis, and I'm a resident at 2203 Grantland, and
Okay. I'm sorry.
I would invite you to walk. As a pedestrian, I would invite you to walk down our stretch of 8th Avenue and see what the experience is like.
Okay. Thank you for that invitation. Okay. Any questions before anybody sits down? Okay. So the applicant has had 1 minute and 46 seconds and now has an additional 5. So you have 6 minutes and 46 seconds, I believe, or 6 minutes and 44.
6:46, Mr. Chairman.
So first question that I would have, and this doesn't count against your time, but so Mr. Seal said that there's going to be a building, a residence to the immediate north that will have 0 morning light. So can you address that, please?
The light question that's put before you under the terms of the zoning code, specifically the language for this special exception, is an analysis for you guys to make as members of the board as to whether the change sought, specifically the moving of the massing toward 8th Avenue, creates
an adverse impact.
The adverse impact, with the idea being not what's by right, which would be a approximately 12-story upside down bowl or pyramid shape. There's going to be shade. The question is not 0 shade, 0 shadow. The question is, more specifically, adverse impact on light, air, shadow, or wind due to the configuration of the building relative to the maximum permitted height standards. So to say a property right next door will get shade from this building, it's going to get shade from a building built by right as well. And so the analysis that the board has to go through, I think, is more about, will this change in massing, this shifting, create something just because of that shift that is an adverse impact in the board's opinion?
So in other words, will the question for us is, will the additional 4 stories create an adverse impact?
Is somehow
obviously 12 stories will create an impact. So
Relative to the 12 stories. Right.
Okay. Thank you for answering that. That was the one.
And naturally, happy to take any other questions at this moment, even before responding to anything. No? Okay. A few points of clarification that may be valuable for the board, and we just touched on the first one that I wanted to acknowledge, which is it's not a question of 0 shade, it's a matter of the relativity from that which is by right to that which we're requesting through the special exception. A question was raised is, what's the cap? What's to prevent something from going even taller than 16 stories or however many feet that will turn out to be? The answer is we're requesting 16. This project cannot be more if the board chooses to approve it. We can't have a 17th floor or anything like that, unless I guess we tore up site plans and came back and made a new request, which I suspect the board would disfavor rather substantially, given that you spent the time on this request. And we have a 0 interest in doing that ourselves. The next item that I thought merited some clarification was our range of units. And as most of you know, with a condo building like this, your unit mix is going to be how many 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, how many 3 bedrooms. We know the range of units is between 100 and 120. By right, it'll be 100 to 120. With the granting of the special exception, it'll be 100 to 120. It's the 100 Legos, right? We're just shifting them closer to 8th Avenue. Additionally, a reasonable question was raised about parking. That's not before the board, but we are parking on site, and the parking structure will accommodate our 100 to 120 units. under the control of the law. As most of you will recall, there is now a parking maximum for properties in the urban zoning overlay, which includes this property. We plan to max out that parking, keep people off the street. A sixth point rate was raised about the community character manual. That, of course, is administered by the planning department. You have their analysis of this request pursuant to their policies and the community character manual in particular from Nashville Next. Additionally, when you get into some of the criteria associated with, well, this is what we look for in the event of a rezoning, then that's read differently than just the analysis they give in their recommendation on a specific special exception case like this one. The final point that I want to leave with, and it brings us back to kind of the core concept. Yes, absolutely. We knew exactly how much acreage this involved. We knew what the height restrictions were, what the sky plane restriction was, what the bulk regulations were. We also knew that the Metro Council passed law that allowed the special exception as a mechanism to penetrate the sky plane restrictions in the event that you meet certain criteria. And because we knew that, we're pursuing exactly that outcome with the expert design from Hastings Architecture, with improvements to the property and surrounding area with regard to transportation, transit, and pedestrian network, and ultimately a project that will work better for this street than its alternative in a number of ways. So with that, I want to invite any questions from any of the board members.
Just wanted to confirm that it appears from the site plan, the building with its balconies is set back 15 feet from the sidewalk?
Yeah, it's, yes, can you hear me? This is, I think I didn't introduce myself. So David Powell, Hastings Architecture, 225 Polk Avenue, Suite 100. Yes, with the new MCSP right-of-way adjustment, there's a 6-foot green space and 8-foot pedestrian zone or sidewalk, and then the 15-foot setback goes from the back of that sidewalk. And that's also where the sky plane begins, or the height control plane begins, is at that setback.
And as you'll recall, the planning department recommended that as one of their conditions, that the MCSP standards shall be met. And of course, we agree to that.
Any more questions? Okay, we'll close the public hearing and discuss. Thoughts?
Now, I think the question of shade and light is one where, no adverse impact. And I think the struggle is to whom. I mean, it's anytime you have a new structure that goes up, it's going to adversely impact somebody. I mean, I'm sympathetic to the folks in the lofts on 8th, but I think anything, whether it's 12 feet or 16 feet, would appear to me to create some impact on that. And we have no ability to stop something that's by right. And so then I think the question is, and Mr. Michael answered Mr. Chairman asked the question, and Mr. Michael raised this as well, which was sort of how do we suss out what that means? And so I am persuaded by the light study that's been submitted. I've heard no testimony that this versus the other structure would impact the pedestrian environment along 8th Avenue. I heard testimony regarding the alley that runs behind this, and I think that is a valuable problem, but it's not within the purview of what we consider here. But it is a meaningful thing to say. So I'm given what a special exception is, and the sort of the things we're supposed to look at for this, I think that they've satisfied the obligation, for light, air, and I had the other one right on the top of my head, but
Wind velocity.
Wind velocity, right?
Yeah, I want to acknowledge that I hear the counter argument, but I'm looking at the packet we received in pages 37, 38, and 39. So looking at these sunlight studies, and I'm not seeing a significant change by shifting, the building
towards 8th in comparison to what they can do by right. The shadow studies essentially look like pretty similar when you're looking at these shadow studies. So, and I think John Michael, when in his rebuttal, essentially said it's not that you don't have a shadow, is that what we're granting them essentially adversely impacts the surrounding community and neighbors, and I don't think that's the case currently. So
I am in agreement of Mr. Cole and Mr. Bradford because applicant did really great study of shadow study. Really appreciate detailed this finding, and I do sympathize with the neighborhood. And compared to flatland currently, here to 16 stories, a big change. But the bottom line is, unfortunately, this community character manual and base zoning, it is by right a 12-story building will be built currently without any height mitigation. And looking at the design of the bulky square 12-story building versus push up to a little bit higher 16-story building, to me, it creates more airspace towards the back of the alley side, so that will have more air creation. And looking at the shadow study, it's certain degree is a little bit different, but it's not overly different. It's just a degree of the shadow is different compared to as built as right and a proposed change. So I think applicant did really a great presentation, and I am in favor of accepting the special exception in this case, as much as I sympathize the neighborhood. But I think that's our purview to compare by right and as proposed. And I think proposal is better design and better meets planning intent.
Thank you. Anybody want to make a motion based on those?
Do y'all have thoughts, Mr. Chairman?
I agree with y'all. I mean, and I also think that I'm convinced by the shadow study. Also, I mean, to me, planning is really neutral in this, and they do make a good point that the allowance additionally will pull the building away from the residential properties to the west. So I think it's just one of those cases where it's probably going to maybe better for some folks, not as, but I don't see an adverse impact in the difference in 4 stories. So those are my thoughts. So. Well, I'll make a motion then. I'll make a motion that the applicant has met the requirements of the special exception, but I would make the motion subject to the applicant meeting the conditions. There's 5 of them that are recommended by planning that the applicant meet those conditions.
Second.
There's a motion, a second. Any further discussion? All right, being none, all in favor? Any opposed? That passes.
Okay, you adopt case 102, 5 and 0 with conditions. In our final case of the day.
Great, motion to adjourn.
Oh, wait.
Oh, we have another one?
We have one more.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry.
One more case.
Sorry, sure. That's right, it's the last one. Okay.
Okay, final case on today's agenda, case 2024-107, Mr. Roberto Gutierrez, the appellant, JMS Property Group LLC, the owner of the property at 2830 Clifton Avenue, requesting a variance from the street setbacks in the RS5 district to construct a new single-family residence. Are there any parties here opposed to case 107? Seeing none, Mr. Chairman.
Is there any opposition? I'm
No,
sorry.
no, sir, there is not. We'll go through the case record first, and subject property you see is located on the, south east margin of Clifton Avenue. It's the red parcel that you see. The exhibit here submitted by the appellant was, and you saw in his submittal, wanting to count some parcels across the street. We cannot do that under the contextual street setback requirements. We're bound just by the block face on which it sits. So his required street setback is based upon the average of the three homes that exist there at 42, 44, and 37.5. He is proposing to construct a duplex on the property. And you see the distance is. If we had a 48-foot adjacent to the gentleman's property on the west side, this parcel here, I believe, is a two-family dwelling, may even be a three-family non-conforming dwelling. Views across the street, you see similar construction of the older style sideways two-family dwellings on Clifton, and then a view facing west toward Interstate 40 and in the bottom right-hand photograph. And while we're doing that, let me flip back over to one item here. Yeah, I apologize. I don't have the information I was looking for, but that's our case records. We have it. Sir, if you would please state your name for the board, just verify no opposition present. With that, I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you. I'm Roberto Gutierrez of Jackson Builders, live at 2819 Old Buena Vista Road, Nashville, Tennessee 37218. So thanks for your time this afternoon. I think this one will be a little bit quicker. It's a front setback request exception for that. So as you can see to the west of the property, we've got the interstate bridge running over it. And then to the east, we have that alley. So there's only 3 properties that we can use for the contextual setback. And I think that we're allowed to use 6 if there are 6. So anyways, that pushes our setback back to 45 feet for the front. And as I was looking up and down Clifton Avenue, I saw, specifically the 3 that I pointed out across the street are ranging from 19 to 31 feet away from the road. And you can kind of see continuing down the road, it is all pretty close. So that's the basis of the request here is that I think we're just trying to fit the character of the area, and given the narrowness of the lot, I can't just make the houses more of a square and less rectangular. So if I can just have them a little bit closer to the road, I don't think it will conflict with anything else that you typically see up and down the road, and it'll just be a more flexible backyard and parking area for the proposed homes. So that's the gist of it.
I've got a couple questions. You're mentioning 2 homes, but the property's zoned RS.
Yes. So I think you can kind of see it on Exhibit B where there's that dotted line running through the center. So, right. So it's, what is it? We're reinstating an underlying lot line. It just hasn't been platted yet on the Metro maps.
Okay. And your ask is 32-foot setback?
Yes.
Okay. I guess I'll save my comments for the deliberation, but thank you for clarifying.
Of course.
Any questions for that? But
Yeah, and that narrowness was based upon the application of the underlying lot line. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we'll close the public hearing and discuss.
Well, since I'm the one that had the objection. I mean, I read about the 6 homes and I knew that wasn't really that wasn't jiving with me using the properties across the street. So that's why I wasn't in agreement earlier. I would feel more comfortable if the setback was 37 and a half feet like the neighboring property and not jutting too far in front of the other properties. So I would be, if we could have a compromise, 37 and a half feet.
So you want it to be 35 feet? Okay.
In line with the neighbor that's numbered 62 on this
Right,
diagram.
yeah, and so, the lot is, I don't really view it as a narrow lot, I mean, because but it's kind of trapezoidal, so when I looked at it, I thought the reason you want to bring it forward is, otherwise you're going to kind of be jutting up against that structure on 62, and it seemed to me that was, that was the problem that justified kind of allowing them to come forward. If they come to 30, did you want 35 feet? What was your?
Oh, I was just saying being in line with the neighbor next door.
So do you
whatever
see
that
an
may
issue
be.
if they're in line with the 37.5?
Is that a new structure? The neighboring next door?
That's this structure.
So that's my only concern, is that we're lining it up with something that may not necessarily be there in the future. And so, I mean, that's, just looking at the if it was new builds that were all along this street, I would be inclined to support it. But I think that, frankly, that trapezoidal shape, even once you apply that underlying lot line, it makes it even weirder, I think, from sort of a uniqueness and narrowness of the lot. Because if you look at that dotted line down the middle, not only do you have that weird shape, but you also do have, very, very skinny underlying lots. So I mean, I think it checks both, and I also think that, based upon how to site these things, given that there's newer structures across the street that are comparably, that are more in line with what the applicant's requesting, I think he's demonstrated a hardship here, but I'm not an architect, so.
So from an architectural perspective, I'm in alignment with Member Carpenter. So, couple things. Even if there's, an older building on the adjacent property, they knock it down in the future, that future build is likely going to be somewhat in alignment with wherever that front face is. That front face is in a similar context with the adjacent property that is 2 doors over. I think that 37.5 feet fits the overall context of everything on that side of the street, just in general. So, yeah, I think from an architectural standpoint,
You wanted it 37.5?
37.5.
Could y'all live with a little splitting the baby to like pulling it to 35 or something?
I think just pushing it any further forward, like that 37.5 is already in front of the, what do we got? It's already in front of the 44 and 42. I think the 37.5 is already splitting the baby. Like, I already think that's already the concession.
So going back, and I totally get what you're saying, but if that building that's on lot 60 is not torn down and they build at 37.5, do you have concerns about that, about it kind of jutting together? And then even if they do tear that structure down on, that's got 62, I don't know whether it's lot 62, are they, because that's kind of an odd shaped lot too. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but do you have concerns about, do either of y'all have concerns about?
I mean, given that,
kind of,
unique location, because the other side, the west side is interstate. So I'm sure they will eventually kind of turn over the house, one house by one house. And considering across the street is much closer to the street, And considering this lot is narrow and angled, so I really don't have problem with original 32. But if you feel better, 35, split the baby. I'm okay with 35, but I think 32 in this specific location is reasonable to me.
Because I think my thinking on this is if we're looking across the street at newer construction that's closer, kind of forward thinking, future thinking, how is the street going to look? And then, I also am looking at those handful of lots between this one and the interstate. And, if they do turn, if these houses or the structures that are on there are demolished and rebuilt, is it going to frankly fit more in the character to have them a touch closer than what they are now? And some of those lots some of them are more conventional, sort of narrow rectangles. I know the one immediately adjacent to it towards the interstate has a little bit odder shape. And so I think, I understand the looking at the neighboring structures, but if the neighboring structures were new or felt like also new builds, I would 100% agree with Ms. Carbon and Mr. Cole. But kind of thinking beyond that, that's sort of where my head is on this.
In these cases, are we supposed to consider future hypothetical scenarios?
I think that my opinion of that is that's kind of risky. I don't know you don't know what's going to happen in the future. It might stay there for a while, but I'll make a motion that we grant a variance based on the narrowness and the shape of the lot, but that it be 35 feet, not the 45 feet, or excuse me, the 32 feet requested is kind of a compromise. So I'll make that motion 35 feet.
I second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, that goes 4-1. Right, 4-1. Okay. All right.
That's
that case.
That's our final case for the day, Mr. Chairman.
Motion adjourned.
Thank you.
Second. All right, we're adjourned.
All right. We are done for the day. Thank you. Be careful out there. Million degrees.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.